Be me, watching this whole thing unfold over about 30 years. Not a main character, more like a witness. Knew Claire from the neighborhood before she got deep into all of this. Went to the same college, different social circles, but you see people when you see people. This is her story, not mine, but I was around for enough of it to feel like I can tell it honestly. And I want to tell it because I think about it sometimes when I see certain kinds of arguments online, the kind where someone is so sure they know better than everyone else what everyone else should want. Claire was that kind of person. This is what that looked like across 3 decades. Claire at 25 was genuinely impressive in a lot of ways. The kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately started reorganizing it in her head. Not physically, but socially. She'd take in a group of people in about 30 seconds and come out with a complete read on everyone. Who was insecure, who was performing, who was actually smart versus just loud. She was usually right about most of it. That accuracy made it easy to trust her judgment on other things, which is part of how the whole thing worked. She had a reputation as someone who saw clearly, and she used that reputation. She was smart, genuinely smart, not the fake kind that just memorizes talking points. She actually read things, primary sources, long, boring academic papers. She liked doing the work. She'd pull out a statistic in a conversation and have the methodology memorized. That's not nothing. That takes time and effort. She cared about the things she cared about, and she took them seriously. The problem was never that she was stupid or that she was wrong about everything. The problem was that she got very attached to being right, and when that happens to a smart person, it can calcify into something that blocks everything else out. She worked at a nonprofit at the time, focused on women's economic independence. Good work, necessary work. The organization helped real people with real problems. She believed in it completely. But she also had this tendency to take the professional framework home and apply it to her personal life. Like the principles were correct, therefore they covered everything. Like there was no part of human experience that wasn't explained by the theory, which is a very satisfying way to live until reality starts adding data points that don't fit the model. Her 3 close friends at the time were Dana, Megan, and Tiffany. All from college, all pretty different from each other, unified mostly by the fact that Claire liked them. Dana was quiet, artistic, the kind of person who carries a sketchbook everywhere and actually uses it. She did illustration work, freelance, nothing huge but consistent. She had this quality of paying close attention to things that other people walked past. Like she was always saving up material. She wasn't simple, but she didn't need conflict to feel alive the way Claire did. They balanced each other in a specific way that worked for a long time. Megan was the driven one. Had her career mapped out before graduation, the kind of planner who uses color-coded systems and means it. 2 internships already, connections already, knew what she wanted and was moving toward it. She and Claire clicked because they both operated at high intensity and both liked winning arguments. But Megan's ambition was focused outward, on actual achievement, not on being philosophically correct. That difference mattered later, but in the early days, they seemed like the same type. Tiffany was the youngest of the group, by 2 or 3 years, which was a bigger gap at 23 than it sounds. She was still in that phase of figuring out who she was and borrowing from whoever seemed most together. And Claire seemed the most together. Most certain, at least. Certainty looks like togetherness when you're young. Tiffany orbited Claire's convictions the way planets orbit things with gravity, just got pulled in. The 4 of them had the classic post-college apartment phase, not all living together, but all within walking distance of each other, constantly in each other's spaces. Wine on someone's floor, bad movies, the kind of long, rambling conversations that go until 2 in the morning about nothing and everything. The kind of friendships that feel like they'll just go on forever because they're too alive to end. From the outside, it looked completely normal. From the inside, apparently, Claire was slowly turning the regular conversations into something with more structure. I heard about the pact secondhand, years later, from Tiffany. By the time she told me about it, she'd had enough distance to describe it without drama. The way it happened was not dramatic. That's the important thing. It wasn't some weird ritual with candles. It was just a regular night. Takeout on the coffee table, laptop open, documentary playing about how motherhood affects women's career earnings, which is a real topic, real data, genuinely interesting stuff. And Claire talking. That specific mode she had where she was relaxed, but also absolutely steering the conversation somewhere. She laid the whole framework out. Marriage traps you because the legal and financial structures make exit costly. Children drain you because the labor is invisible and asymmetrically distributed. The system is built to manufacture your consent to dependency. All of this delivered with citations, with the easy confidence of someone who has done the reading and knows it. And she wasn't wrong about the data. That's the genuinely tricky part. A lot of what she said was true. She was just arranging true things to push everyone toward a conclusion she'd already locked in. The conclusion being that the right choice for all four of them was permanent independence. No long-term partners, no children, freedom as the only real goal worth having. Dana was quiet through most of it, the way Dana was always quiet through things. She was listening, but you couldn't tell what she was doing with what she heard. Megan was nodding in that fast way she had when something confirmed what she already wanted to believe. She'd been using her ambition as a reason to keep relationships at arm's length for a while. Now here was a moral scaffolding to hang that on. Someone was telling her the choice she'd already been making was not just convenient, but correct. That's a very easy thing to accept. Tiffany went along because Tiffany was 23 and Claire was 25, and that gap felt enormous. And because everyone else in the room was agreeing. And so they more or less agreed. Nobody signed anything. Nobody took a vow in any formal way. But there was a shared understanding by the end of the night that they were going to be different. Not going to fall into the patterns. Not going to let the system get them. Not going to need anyone in ways that could be used against them. Claire was satisfied in a way that was almost visible. She'd built something, a circle, a coalition, a group of people who were going to live the way she believed was correct. That probably felt good. Probably felt like proof she was right about everything. One more thing about Claire before the story actually moves. She had a specific phrase she used a lot in those early years. Something about how loving yourself enough to protect your future was the most radical act available. It sounded good. It sounded like something you'd embroider on something and hang up. But over time, I noticed she applied it selectively. It covered choosing not to have children, choosing not to marry, choosing not to depend. It did not cover choosing to trust someone, or choosing to be vulnerable, or choosing to want things that made you reachable. Those choices got a different label. Those were weaknesses, patterns, the system getting inside your head. The framework had a very clean definition of which freedoms were real, and it turned out all the real freedoms looked exactly like what Claire had already decided to do. The ones that led somewhere different were just confusion in disguise. I think about that sometimes, the way a belief system can arrange itself so that any evidence against it gets reclassified as more evidence for it. Makes the thing unfalsifiable, makes it very comfortable, makes it very lonely. The next couple of years were pretty normal on the surface. Everyone was doing the building a life thing. Claire's nonprofit was doing well. She'd gotten a small grant for a project she was running. Megan was already moving fast through the ranks at her company, getting recognition, getting a bigger desk. Dana was picking up more illustration clients, mostly editorial work, some small book covers. Tiffany was bouncing around between positions, trying things. which was just how Tiffany was. They still had the wine nights, still talked constantly, still felt like a unit. From the outside, the pact didn't seem to change anything visible, but things were changing in Dana that weren't visible. I noticed it before anyone told me anything. Ran into her at a coffee place, maybe 2 years after what I'd later learn was the night of the pact. She was with a guy, and she did this thing when she introduced us, where she was slightly too casual about it. Over-casual, the way people get when they're trying not to emphasize something. We talked for a few minutes, and then I went on with my day. But I kept thinking about her face when I walked up. There had been a split second before she composed herself where she looked like someone who'd been caught doing something they hadn't fully decided how to feel about yet. A few weeks later, she mentioned him to me in a different context, said she'd met him at an art opening a while back, that he was a painter, that he was calm. She kept coming back to that word, calm, like it was the thing she most needed to name. Said he didn't try to fix her or compete with her, he just listened and was interested. Which honestly sounds like someone describing a functional adult human being, but I understood why it felt significant. And then she said she hadn't told Claire yet. Not like she was mentioning a scheduling issue. Like a confession. Like she was telling me something she'd been holding. I asked her what she thought Claire would say, and she looked at the table for a second. Then she said she knew exactly what Claire would say. That was the problem. She already knew the speech she was going to get. She'd heard it applied to other women's choices, often enough. And she was dreading it, not because she thought Claire was right, but because she didn't want to have the fight. And because some part of her had been trained over years of friendship to feel guilty about wanting what she wanted. I don't know the exact conversation when Dana finally told Claire. I know the aftermath because Dana described it to me much later. But I also know something that happened in between that Dana only mentioned once. She said that in the weeks before she told Claire, she kept rehearsing it, trying to find the version of the truth that would land softly. Kept rewriting the conversation in her head, looking for the framing that would make Claire okay with it. And at some point, she said she realized she'd spent more mental energy trying to manage Claire's reaction than she'd spent on anything in her actual relationship. More than thinking about whether she was happy, more than thinking about what she wanted. All that energy going into a preemptive apology for a choice she hadn't been asked to explain. And when she realized that she said something shifted. Not anger, not resentment, exactly. Just a very quiet clarity about what the friendship had been requiring of her. The message Claire sent after was exactly what Dana had predicted, which was maybe the worst part. Not that it was cruel, though it was, but that it was so expected. Dana had already written it in her head before it arrived. She knew the vocabulary, the structure, the move from concern to disappointment to implication. And when the real message came, it matched the imagined one almost word for word, which meant the friendship had become something you could predict entirely, something with no room for surprise. And a friendship with no room for surprise is not really a friendship anymore. It's a management situation. I asked her years later if she missed Claire. She thought about it for a real second, not performing the consideration, actually considering. And she said something like yes and no. She missed who she'd thought Claire was at the beginning, the person who seemed curious and alive and genuinely interested. She didn't miss who Claire had become, or maybe who she'd always been underneath. She said the honest version was that she missed a person who probably hadn't ever fully existed. And that's a particular kind of loss. Not clean, not simple, just quiet. Claire wrote a long message. Dana showed it to me once, years down the line, pulled it up on her phone. It was 3 dense paragraphs. It used the language of concern, but the structure of accusation. Things about how Dana had seemed like someone who actually understood, about the work they'd done to get clear on these things, about what it meant to give up now. the word disappointed appeared twice. It was articulate and cold, and designed to make the recipient feel like a failure for experiencing a normal human attachment. Dana's reply was something like 5 words, maybe 6, along the lines of being happy and that being the whole story. And then she mostly stopped returning Claire's calls with the same urgency she used to. Claire went to Megan and Tiffany immediately, framed the whole thing as Dana having some kind of episode, making a choice she'd regret. Megan said the right things, backed her up, expressed the appropriate concern. But something in the way Megan did it had changed. It was like watching someone say their lines correctly, but at the wrong speed. The words were right, but the energy behind them was somewhere else. And Claire, who could read a room full of strangers in 30 seconds, somehow didn't read that in her closest friend. Maybe because she wasn't looking for it. Maybe because noticing it would have required noticing something about herself. Because Megan's life had been quietly adding up in ways Claire's framework hadn't accounted for. The career was going great. She had a title now, managed a team, was respected. All of that was real, and it mattered to her. But she kept ending up at company events and leaving exactly as she'd arrived. This isn't a dramatic thing. It's just a slow accumulation. 30 minutes of coworkers passing phones around, showing vacation photos, and kids doing stuff. Nobody asking her anything particular. Not because they disliked her, just because there wasn't really a question to ask. Her life outside work had been deliberately kept empty in the way Claire had endorsed. And, it turned out, deliberately, empty is still empty. She started seeing someone from the office, low-key at first. She didn't tell anyone in the group. Not Claire, obviously, but also not Tiffany. And when things got serious, she still didn't mention it. She'd watched what happened with Dana and done the math. When she found out she was pregnant, she called Claire herself. Not because she owed her an explanation, I think, but because she wanted to be the one to say it out loud rather than let Claire find out another way. She told me later that Claire went completely silent for a long time. Not sad or angry, just this long pause that was somehow worse than either. And then came out with something about throwing everything away. Megan told me her answer was short, something about keeping what she actually wanted. And that was it. Call over. She told me she felt lighter afterward, which is maybe the clearest signal about what the friendship had become. Hanging up should not feel like putting down something heavy. Claire tried to frame it as another breakdown, another mistake, another friend going off course. But Tiffany had been to enough of Megan's work things to know the context. She'd seen the photos from the baby shower planning, the way the work friends rallied around Megan. She could tell this was not a breakdown. She didn't say that to Claire directly, but she noted it, filed it somewhere, and that file was getting full. The baby shower was the moment when the map of the friendship group permanently changed shape. Claire was not invited. Dana was, with her husband and their daughter, who was about 2 by then. And Dana and Megan just picked up where they'd been before Claire made things weird, like the years of distance had been a hold, not a deletion. They hugged and caught up and talked about the things their lives now had in common. Real things, present things, the kind of conversation that has texture. Tiffany was there too, slightly sideways, still technically in the Claire-aligned corner. But standing in that room, she could feel the gravity shift. This was where the actual warmth was. That's hard to ignore for very long. I saw Claire around that time at a fundraiser the nonprofit was involved with. She looked good, composed, had good posture the way she always did. The podcast had been going for a while by then. She had an audience, was getting invited to panels. She talked to me for a while about a project she was working on, an article, or maybe the beginning of something longer. It was interesting conversation. She was always interesting to talk to. But I noticed she never asked me a single thing about my life. Not once. Not from rudeness. She wasn't rude. It just wasn't where her attention went. The whole conversation was a series of ideas she was developing, and I was the surface she was developing them against, which is fine for a lecture, but not great for friendship. And then she mentioned Dana and Megan in a way that made them sound like case studies. Not people she missed, not people she was worried about. Data points that confirmed something she was already arguing. She published something around that period on one of the smaller sites that ran that kind of content. I read it when someone sent it to me. Headline was something about choosing herself without regrets. It was well written, because she was always well written. But if you read the structure of it carefully, the whole thing was built around preemptively defending a choice against critics who had not actually said anything to her. Every third paragraph was a rebuttal to an objection that hadn't been raised, which tells you something about what was happening in her head underneath the confidence. She was arguing with Dana and Megan and whoever else in her imagination because they weren't available to argue with in real life, and the argument was still going. Tiffany lasted several more years in the friendship after that. Longer than the others, partly out of genuine loyalty, partly because she was younger and still catching up. She told me later she kept waiting for Claire to soften, to show some crack in the certainty, to let something else in, and occasionally she'd think she saw it. Some late-night conversation where Claire would trail off or look out the window for a second longer than usual. But then the certainty would come back on like a light, and they'd be back to the same place. Tiffany said it was exhausting to keep hoping for something that kept not happening. The podcast continued, just the two of them after the others left. It never grew into anything significant, a few hundred regulars at most, occasional spikes when something they said got shared somewhere. Claire treated it like a movement. She'd reference the community in a way that suggested something much larger than what it was. Tiffany played along for a long time. It wasn't malicious. She just didn't want to say out loud what she could clearly see. By Tiffany's mid-30s, she'd been seeing someone for over a year and hadn't mentioned it to Claire once. A year? 12 months of a meaningful relationship that was happening inside her life, but outside the friendship. Which is not how you treat a close friend if you actually feel safe with them. You hide good news from people who you know won't share in it. And Tiffany knew. When she finally told Claire she apparently did it on a regular afternoon, no big setup. Just said she was with someone, that it was serious, that she wanted Claire to know. And Claire ran the script. The same script she'd run on Dana, the same one she'd run on Megan. The disappointment angle, the you were different angle, the letting down the work angle. Tiffany sat with it, let her finish, and then said something that surprised both of them, or at least surprised Claire. She said something about how Claire had taught her to be strong enough to make her own choices, and that this was her making one. Tiffany told me later she didn't plan to say it that way. It just came out. She said she wasn't sure if it was meant kindly or not. Probably both. The kind of thing that's too true to be entirely cruel and too sharp to be entirely kind. She left, and the friendship didn't survive it in any functional way. They didn't have a dramatic falling out. There were no final speeches. Tiffany just stopped initiating, and Claire apparently didn't chase it, which tells you something about what the friendship had been built on. When Tiffany stopped putting energy in, there wasn't enough from the other side to keep it moving. Claire kept going. That's the thing about people built the way she was built. They keep going. The nonprofit work continued. She became more of a public voice in her corner of the conversation. The small book deal happened. She got it written. It came out to reasonable reviews, sold okay. She did a speaking circuit for a while, colleges mostly, some conferences. She had her niche, and her niche respected her. On paper, it looked like a career that was working, and maybe it was. But Dana and Megan and Tiffany had quietly reorganized around each other in her absence. Texting group without her in it, holiday catch-ups she wasn't part of. Not out of spite, just out of the natural way people consolidate around warmth. And Claire was putting her energy into a machine that gave her output instead of presence. There's a difference between having an audience and having people. An audience applauds and logs off. People show up when something actually happens. Claire had built something. She genuinely built something. But the people who'd known her longest and actually understood her weren't in it. And I think somewhere under all the certainty, she knew that. I think that's what the relentless output was for. Keep the machine running loud enough that the quiet doesn't have room to say anything. She posted something at some point that was clearly about the three of them, without using any names. Something about women who chose comfort over conviction, who let the system talk them back into its patterns. Megan sent it to the others without comment, just forwarded it with nothing attached. They all read it and made a collective decision not to respond. Not a dramatic decision, no meeting about it, just the shared instinct that engaging would give it something it didn't deserve. They'd learned by then that Claire's arguments were designed to be engaged with. Engaging was the mechanism by which she kept people in orbit. The exit was just to stop orbiting. The years between roughly 40 and 50 are where I have the least visibility into this story. I'd moved to a different city. The mutual connections had spread out. I was getting updates occasionally rather than regularly. What I know is from those occasional updates and from the long phone call with Tiffany later. Claire kept at it. More content, the occasional feature in something larger, a podcast rebrand. She'd made her life into a project, and she kept working on the project. There is something almost admirable about the consistency. Almost. Dana had settled out of the city with her family by then. 2 kids, the husband, a house with more room, illustration work she was proud of. The kids grew up in the background of her professional life in a way that seemed to work for everyone. Megan's daughter was turning into a person in the distinct and sometimes confrontational way teenagers do. Megan told me at some point that the kid argued with her at the dinner table about everything, pushed back constantly. And the way Megan described it, she was clearly delighted by this. The daughter had opinions and wasn't afraid to use them, which Megan found funny and appropriate. Tiffany's son had turned into someone with a very specific and inexplicable passion for fishing. She had not seen that coming at all. She went with him anyway, told me it was mostly boring and also exactly right. The way she said it, I understood what she meant. It was the right kind of boring. Claire at 50-something was still posting, still writing, still being invited to things. But something in the public version of her life had a quality I can only describe as insistent. Like when someone tells you repeatedly that they're fine, and each repetition makes you less sure. Not that she was performing happiness exactly, more that she was performing certainty so hard it left no room for anything else. She wrote something that year about 55 being when life actually starts, which is a thing people say, and sometimes it's genuinely true. But in context, it read like a real-time reframe, like the goalposts had moved again, and she was already in position to call it a win. The reunion happened because of a funeral. A woman they'd all known from college, not someone any of the 4 were extremely close to, but someone they all genuinely liked. One of those people who was friendly with everyone without being fake about it, the kind who remembered small things about you. She died younger than anyone should die, something sudden, and the service was about an hour outside the city. The kind of distance that most people make the trip for anyway, because some things you just show up to. I got the full account of this from Tiffany over a long call. The way she described it, Dana and Megan found each other almost immediately after arriving. One of them spotted the other across the gathering space, and it was one of those moments where 2 people realize they've been waiting to be in the same room again. They hugged for a while, the kind of hug where nobody is the first to let go. And then they just started talking, right there, the way old friends do when there's been a gap. Not catching up in a formal sense, more like resuming mid-sentence. Tiffany came in a few minutes later, and it was the same. Three people who had been through a weird shared chapter together and come through it into actual lives, standing together again. The shared weight of the reason they were there made it feel more real than it might have otherwise. There was sadness in the room, but there was also genuine warmth between them. Claire was there, standing at the edge of the gathering rather than in the middle of it. Dressed well, she always dressed well. That never changed. Holding a small plate of something from the reception table, the pose of someone who looks occupied. One of those social positions that means you're waiting for something to happen while trying not to look like you're waiting. Tiffany said she wasn't sure who made the first move, but eventually the four of them were in the same part of the room, and the conversation started carefully, the way it had to. The person they'd lost, memories of her, the specific kindness she'd had, that gave them 20 minutes of safe ground, and by the end of it, something had relaxed enough to go somewhere slightly more personal. Dana pulled out her phone at some point and showed a photo. Not to Claire specifically, to all of them, but Claire was there. The house, the kitchen table covered in art supplies and kids' homework and the general wreckage of a lived-in space. Her daughter in the background looking at the camera sideways. Her husband's jet. Not in a dramatic way, nothing cinematic about it. Just someone alone in a parking lot scrolling through their phone the way you do when you're not sure what to do next. Then she got in, and the car pulled out, and she was gone. Tiffany was quiet for a second after she told me that part. Then she said something like, "It's not satisfying in the way you'd expect it to be." She'd spent years being frustrated with Claire, years feeling managed and judged. She thought she'd feel something cleaner at the end, some version of closure that felt resolved. But it mostly just felt like watching someone who made a wrong turn a long time ago and was still on the same wrong road, still moving, still covering distance, just not toward anything. I've thought about this story a lot in the years since. Not obsessively, just the way certain things come back to you when you see related things in the world. And the thing I keep coming back to is that Claire wasn't stupid and she wasn't evil. She was wrong in a specific way that very smart people are capable of being wrong. She found a framework that explained some real things and then used it to explain everything. And when the people around her started producing evidence that contradicted the framework, she classified the evidence as error. Dana wasn't happy, she was deceived. Megan wasn't choosing something meaningful, she was choosing comfort. Tiffany wasn't growing, she was regressing. The framework was always right, and the data that contradicted it was always the problem. That's not analysis, that's faith. And faith is fine for some things, but it's a rough way to navigate your actual life. Because the thing is, Dana has 2 kids and a house outside the city and work she's proud of. Dana got the life she wanted, and it turns out what she wanted was not what Claire wanted for her. And that's it. That's the whole thing. There's no deeper lesson in Dana. She just knew what she wanted, and eventually went and got it. Megan's daughter is in college now, apparently, arguing about everything, full of opinions. Megan thinks this is great. Tiffany's son still fishes. She still goes. She still finds it mostly boring and exactly right. None of these are remarkable outcomes. They're just normal ones. Which is the point. Claire is still writing, still making the argument, still convinced she's right. And maybe she is right for herself. I genuinely don't know. But the argument she keeps making is that she's right for everyone. And the 3 people who knew her the longest and who she cared about most in the world all came to different conclusions on their own. And those conclusions seem to be working out fine. She posted something not long ago about how 55 is when the real part of life begins. The comments were mostly people she'd never met, people who found her writing useful or validating or interesting. Nobody who'd been in the room the night of the pact. Nobody who'd been there for any of the specific moments that make up an actual shared history. Strangers who liked the ideas, which maybe was enough for her. I hope it was enough. Because the alternative is that she drove home from that parking lot after the funeral and sat in her apartment and felt the weight of all the empty chairs at a table she'd pushed everyone away from. And that's not satisfying to imagine. That's just sad. And she was better than that, even if the choices she made didn't always show it. MFW I heard from Dana recently, just a normal message checking in. She sent a photo of her daughter working on something at the kitchen table, same chaotic background from the funeral photo. The daughter is apparently applying to art school. Dana sounded genuinely surprised, like it hadn't occurred to her this was going to happen, but also clearly proud in a way she didn't have words for yet. MFW Megan's daughter apparently started her own small business this year. Something online. Megan explained it to me twice, and I still don't completely understand it, but Megan does, and she's on the board of advisors for it, unpaid, just because her kid asked. MFW Tiffany's son caught the biggest fish of his life last spring and called her first. Not his dad, her. She said she screamed loud enough that the neighbors probably heard. About a fish. She is not a fish person, and she screamed about a fish because her kid called her first. MFW Claire posted something last week, long and well argued, as always, about the importance of not measuring your life by conventional metrics. The comments were supportive, mostly strangers. MFW. None of us said anything. MFW. We all just kept moving. Be Claire. Still writing, still certain, still alone,